G'day, eh? My name's RJ, and welcome to Killer Canuck, a new recurring segment here on RUE MORGUE TV. I'd like to take a dive into Canadian horror, how it started, how it's grown, where it is today. I'm going to look through Canada's horror history, from the 1960s, through the tax shelter era, the creature feature aughts, and the Astron 6-fueled 2010s. So where else to start but from the beginning? Let's take a look through Canada's first horror film, 1961's The Mask. Prior to the 1960s, the feature film industry in Canada, let alone the horror film industry, was virtually non-existent. There were several startup attempts made prior to the foundation of the National Film Board in 1939, but none lasted for more than just a few years. After the Government of Canada brought over John Grierson and he founded the NFB, Canada's film industry veered sharply into documentary, something it's still known for today. That's what happens when the man who literally coined the term documentary is one of the founders of your entire industry. During the Second World War, many of Canada's films were documentaries shot abroad. And this brings us to Julian Roffman. Born in Montreal in 1915, Roffman studied film in New York and was one of the first hired members of the NFB. He traveled overseas and shot war propaganda for Canada, but after sustaining an injury, he returned home. I'm the proudest girl in the world. In the late 1950s, he met Nat Taylor, a distributor most famously known to Canadians as one of the co-founders of Cineplex Theatres. The two wanted to make a film that would be commercially successful, and what they came up with was The Bloody Brood. However, it was Roffman Taylor's next venture that would make Canadian history. The Mask, initially released in 1961 and re-released in 1967 and 1971 as The Eyes of Hell, is widely regarded as Canada's first horror film. It's also simultaneously Canada's first independent film to be distributed widely by a major American studio, as well as the first Canadian film to be shot in 3D, though only partially. The movie follows a psychiatrist who comes into the possession of a tribal mask, one that is said to bring out the darkest thoughts and impulses of whoever wears it. The film is remembered mostly for the surrealistic dream sequences peppered throughout, and the gimmick they presented the audience. On their way into the theater, audience members would be given a unique mask equipped with red and blue anaglyph lenses that would help them see the world that the mask created. When prompted in the movie with a voiceover telling them to put the mask on now, audiences would raise their own mask to their face and enjoy the new fantastical 3D world. The initial 1961 release, as well as the restored Blu-ray, begins with a prologue by Jim Moran, a quote, real-life mask collector.
I think it's safe to say I'm something of an authority on rare masks.
Jim is here to tell audiences what to expect in the following feature, as well as teach them how to use their masks. This opening scene was cut in the 67 and 71 releases, likely due to audiences remembering how to hold cardboard up to their faces. Jim Moran was a publicist known mostly for a series of bizarre publicity stunts through the 40s and 50s. These included things like walking a live bull through a New York china shop, or spending 10 days looking for a needle in a literal haystack, or sitting on an ostrich egg for over 19 days to promote the 1947 film The Egg and I. This egg actually hatched, and the baby ostrich he named Ossip Moran was donated to a local zoo. After Jim says the word mask,
An unusual mask, 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 the mask, 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 the mask, 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 ritual of the mask.
A number of times in 5 minutes, we meet Michael Radin, played by Canadian actor Martin Leveux. He chases a frantic woman through the woods for a few moments and receives a nice fingernail scratch to the face, before eventually catching and strangling her. Next, we're in the office of psychiatrist Dr. Alan Barnes, played by Paul Stevens.
Hello, Michael.
Radin visits him to discuss his recent adventures, and Dr. Barnes listens intently while doing his best Ray Wise impression. He tells Dr. Barnes that he thinks he killed a woman last night and that the mask is to blame. Barnes, like any good film psychologist, tells Radin that it's likely all in his head. Radin leaves the office angrily, yelling that he's going to prove to Dr. Barnes what the mask is capable of. Later that night at Radin's apartment, he packages something in a box that definitely did not just happen to be lying around the set, and he calls down for his landlady, Mrs. Kelly.
Mrs. Kelly!
Mrs. Kelly is played by Canadian actor Eleanor Beecroft, who, born in 1906, passed away in 2007 at the age of 101. Radin pays Mrs. Kelly to mail a package for him, which she agrees to, though not before she complains about the state of the room.
See if you can't keep the place clean.
After she leaves, Radin produces his, what is that, a Luger? He produces his Luger and says goodbye to his bobblehead. Mrs. Kelly returns after mailing his package and we're treated to a vintage turn, zoom, and scream. Classic.
It's for you.
The suicide is called into Lieutenant Martin, who may be a used car salesman in disguise. He listens on the phone while this extra does some, acting, and he and his partner set off towards Raiden's apartment.
Another interesting case, huh?
They're always interesting.
Some quick detective work deduces Raiden was employed at the Museum of Ancient History, so our horror movie/detective story takes us there next. Lieutenant Martin pulls up to the museum, the exterior of the University of Toronto circa 1960, and meets with Dr. Soames. Soames informs Martin that Raiden was bringing home and cataloging artifacts from a recent dig. Martin, unsure if Raiden's death truly was a suicide, decides to bring Soames back to Raiden's apartment to see if anything is missing. Soames determines that something is missing, a ritual mask of little monetary value, but great value to scholars. He warns of a legend associated with the mask that states that it can bring out the darkest thoughts and impulses of its wearer, and that there are rites involving human sacrifice connected to it. Lieutenant Martin visits Dr. Barnes. The two discuss Raiden's obsession with the mask. We're treated to some wonderful dramatic irony here, as Martin says it would be really helpful if they knew where the mask had disappeared to, while it's sitting literally right there. It's a little strange that Dr. Barnes doesn't open a package that was shipped by the recently deceased that's sitting right at his desk, but nevertheless, their conversation concludes and Martin departs. Based on an actual ancient Aztec mask, the skull of the smoking mirror, the mask, though shown here in black and white, was actually bright blue and green with golden eyes, and the teeth were allegedly made from real human teeth. In walks Pamela Albright, Dr. Barnes' fiancée.
Good evening, Dr. Barnes.
Played by Claudette Nevins in her first on-screen appearance. She consoles him over the loss of Raiden, and he shows her the mask. She's disgusted by the sight of it, so leaves to go get groceries. Alan reads a note from Raiden, chastising him for not listening. At the end of the letter, Raiden challenges Barnes, and subsequently the audience, to audience members who understood Jim Moran's complex instructions at the beginning of the film would raise their anaglyph masquerade pieces and be treated to the first of 3 psychedelic dream sequences. The dream sequence conveys a bunch of unsettling and surreal imagery, like flying skulls and burning hands. It follows a masked man, played by professional mime Rudy Linschoten, in his only IMDb credit, as he pursues a masked woman being taken away by hooded figures. It concludes with what looks like human sacrifice, and this amazing snakes for eyes effect. Back in reality, Pam returns from groceries to find Barnes on the ground. He rises up, claiming that Raiden didn't have the proper medical training to help him control the visions, and falling prey to the age-old movie doctor cliché of ego, thinks that he can beat the impulses. Pam is worried and tells Barnes that he should seek the help of his old mentor, Professor Quincy. We're treated to some clever lighting here, as the bright-eyed innocent Pam's face is lit almost entirely, and the newly subjugated Barnes's is half hidden by shadow. Pam is proven almost immediately to be right, as Barnes hears the mask calling for him to put it back on again. But when he reaches for it, we get this admittedly goofy chase scene wherein Pam steals the mask from under him and runs away. She steps outside and hails a very convenient cab, hops in, and then we get possibly one of the tamest car chases I've ever seen. Pam instructs the cab driver to bring her to the Museum of Ancient History. And then what, she tells the driver to bring the mask inside? Hopefully he gets a nice tip at the end of the trip. Barnes enters the museum to retrieve the mask. He walks up the stairs that were shot at the Royal Ontario Museum of Toronto at what is now the Shad Gallery of Biodiversity. Those stairs are actually still there. Barnes makes his way to Soames' office and finds the mask, bringing us to this. Pam apparently loves her fiancé so much that she's drawing a picture of him while sitting next to a portrait of him. The beginning of the scene is one that was cut for time, and honestly, this picture gag is probably why. Could they not think of anything else for her to be drawing? Knock knock, Lieutenant Martin's here, visiting Miss Albright's all-white apartment. He asks her a series of questions and she deflects all of them, intent on protecting her muse. After deducing that she won't be telling him anything, they say the traditional Canadian farewell.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry too. Bye.
And we check back in with Dr. Barnes, who's back at his office, ready to
The mask on now.
The second dream sequence is just as surreal as the first, full of dangly eyeballs, spiders, some ghost hands, a snake that runs on magnets, and even an embodiment of the mask itself. Just ignore the wires. Barnes stumbles around his office in a trance after removing the mask, and starts rubbing his secretary's glasses on his face. His secretary, Jill Goodrich, enters and for whatever reason doesn't find it weird that he's playing with her glasses. He tells her it's too late for her to be doing work before putting on his workplace harassment face lighting and offering to drive her home. When they get there, Barnes starts putting the moves on Jill, but when he takes it too far and starts to strangle her, she lays on the horn, giving us a sudden transition to Barnes sitting in the home of Professor Quincy, his mentor. He asks Quincy to help him study the mask. Quincy is hesitant at first, but when Barnes lets it be known that he intends to wear the mask again, Quincy relents, so long as the experiments are controlled. Meanwhile, the police are doing police things, and they come to the conclusion that maybe Barnes wanted to imitate Raiden and is now doing his own experiments on the mask. With chirps in check,
Stop eating, you're getting overweight.
they head out. Pam confronts her fiancé in his office about the mask. If there was ever a question that the mask wasn't an allegory for addiction, this scene puts that to rest.
You have to take the drug again, Alan. Is it like an addiction that builds?
She delivers an ultimatum. He relents and tells her that he has asked Quincy for help, and together they agree to go to the professor's house. Quincy and Pam sedate Alan and put him in a bedroom upstairs, neglecting, of course, to keep the mask out of his reach. Because when Alan hears the voice of the mask calling him, he wakes up and we're off on our final dream sequence. Our mime friend is ferried across a dry ice lake, Phantom of the Opera style, until he reaches an altar with the masked woman on it. When the mime tries to kiss her, the embodiment of the mask shows up and starts shooting fire everywhere as the altar collapses, signaling Alan's total descent into madness. He leaves Quincy's house angrily, and Pam calls the police. Knock knock, it's Jill Goodrich, unfazed by their previous workplace harassment, of course. When he left her house this morning, it was a little after 9, and now they're in Bob Cajun, seeing the constellations reveal themselves one star at a time.
Look at the stars, Jill.
Alan's impulses again get the better of him, and he tries to strangle Jill.
I must experience the greatest act of a human mind. To take another life.
She resists and frees herself, giving Dr. Barnes a thematic Michael Raiden-style scar, and hopefully a letter of resignation in the process. The police have called Pam back, and Lieutenant Martin is on his way. They've been instructed to grab the mask and get out of the house in case Alan comes back. Pam heads up to grab the mask, and Alan returns in a rage. He strangles his old mentor to death before heading upstairs.
Get out of my way.
Completely unhinged, he demands that Pam put the mask on and feel its power for herself. She refuses, but he forces the mask onto her. Frantically, he asks her what she sees, but she softly weeps that she sees only him. Too pure for Alan to handle, he attacks her and calls her a liar. As he strangles her, Lieutenant Martin barges in and the two get into a scuffle. With a punch to the gut and an authentic karate chop to the neck, the doctor is down and Pam is saved. We next see the mask on display at the museum, and it doesn't take long before it starts to call out for its next victim. Fresh off their middling success with The Bloody Brood, Roffman and Taylor wanted to produce a commercially successful film that they could market outside of Canada to the United States. They had meetings with Warner Bros. And Paramount and tried to market the unique idea of the 3D audience interaction. Warner Bros. And Paramount, aware of William Castle's success with gimmicks, both put forth offers. Paramount offered them $350,000, but Roffman and Taylor went with Warner's lower offer of $300,000 because they were, quote, nicer guys. The movie was budgeted both time and money-wise more heavily towards the 3D sequences. They took about 8 weeks to shoot, and Roffman blasted through the rest of the script in only 16 days. He hired a Serbian montage expert named Slavko Vorkapic to handle the 3D sequences. But when Roffman saw that his ideas involved hundreds of frogs and lizards and giant tanks of ink, he put a stop to it and let Vorkapic go. Vorkapic's name has stayed on the film due to contract reasons, and when Roffman asked him why he would want his name on something that had a high likelihood of going poorly, Vorkapic responded, "You're a driven man. I trust you." Now Roffman was stuck designing and directing 3D sequences he had no intentions of even going near. He corresponded with a psychologist in Toronto and researched Timothy Leary's experiments with LSD.
He really wanted it to be hallucinatory. He was even in touch with Timothy Leary before Leary was famous.
Sadly, Roffman resented being known mostly for his work on The Mask, as he wanted to pursue more serious work after. He even turned down a 2-picture deal from Paramount to make more horror films. The Mask would be Roffman's last time directing, though he would continue to produce Canucksploitation films through the 60s and 70s until his death in 2000. The Mask is cemented in Canadian horror history, and even though Roffman resented it, he opened the genre doors for countless inspirational Canadians. It was followed by meandering through the 60s and a relentless boom in the 1970s thanks to the tax shelter era. Some good, most bad, and a lot to unpack when we continue our trip through Canada's horror history. So until then, I've been RJ, this has been Killer Canuck, and thanks for watching. Hey folks, RJ here. Thanks so much for watching, and if you liked what you saw, be sure to drop me a like and hit the subscribe button. Just want to give a huge thank you to the folks here at RUE Morgue for hosting my series on their channel. I got a lot of great content coming your way. If you like the tune playing in the background, be sure to check out Prodigy on SoundCloud and over at noiserecords.com. There'll be a link in the description below. Let me know what Canadian horror films you think I should cover. Until next time.